Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Medical School HQ Pre-Med Workshop Series. We're so excited to have you here. Today is Situational Judgment Test Day. So as you're joining us, please go to the chat. You might notice in the chat, your default says to hosts and panelists. Please go ahead and change that right now to everyone. And then there in the everyone, will you tell me where you're watching from and also what year you hope to start med school? Are you applying this year? Are you applying next year, future years? Say hello in the chat, friends.
2 Calis right off the bat.
Yeah, Los Gatos, California, and another California, both starting 2024. Another California represent. There we go. There's some East Coast. We got Boston, Pennsylvania, Utah, Virginia,
Alaska.
New Jersey. Plan to apply 2025. Way to plan ahead, Siddhartha. Another NJ, Alaska. All right, getting some
where in Alaska? Probably Anchorage or Fairbanks, but where in Alaska if you're around that area? I grew up partly there, so I'm curious.
I always forget that. I'm like, you're a New Mexico girl.
Yeah, no,
not exclusively.
Yeah, Anchorage right now was in Fairbanks. Yeah, so one of my med students just matched there for residency. She's doing primary care up there, so she's
going to be like Northern Exposure, where she thinks she's going to a city and then she ends up in a bunch of tiny little quirky town.
She's going in with eyes wide open. She wanted that. That was her top choice. She wanted to be out there in the boonies looking for a new experience. So I'm super happy for her. She's really gonna love it. My grandpa actually he owns a bar up in Anchorage called Chilkoot Charlie's. So if this person's in Anchorage, probably knows what Chilkoot Charlie's is. It's a weird place, but it's a place. Absolutely. Coots, yes. There you go.
The connections we make.
Yeah, fun.
All right, well, let's get started. We'll do brief introductions here. I'm Rachel Grubbs. I'm one of the MAP to Medical School co-founders. I've been advising pre-meds for about 20 years now. Started a lot in standardized tests, so I know a lot about the MCAT, and then kind of found from there, I kept wanting to help students earlier. So moved from just doing MCAT prep to pre-med admissions so that I could help people through the entire cycle. Dina Golini, our newest medical school headquarters team member. Now, you're not new at all to advising. You're just new.
I'm not new to advising or admissions, just new to the team. So I am new to the team and coming out of a role as senior MD admissions officer at Stanford Medicine. And prior to that, I was in the SMP world at the Masters of Medical Sciences program as an assistant director of advising at Brown University's Alpert Medical School. Also part-time was at Northeastern University, helping out in their pre-health advising office. And prior to that, a long career as a high school college counselor. So excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you here. And
Thank
Courtney
you.
Lewis used to be our newbie, but now
I know.
Like you've been here forever.
I'm going to be a year in about 2 weeks. Yeah. It's fun.
Tell the friends a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So prior director of admissions at Burrell College of Osteopathic Medicine in New Mexico. I co-owned a scribe company, so I've been aware of pre-meds for a very, very long time. In my profession and was drawn to higher education things. So it was a perfect blending of everything. But I started as an advisor, and then a year and a half later, I was the director. And then I held 2 elected positions on the National Council for other deans and directors of admissions as officers there. So I was able to kind of guide where the ACOMAS application was going and things like that, but learned a lot about the MD side as well. There was a lot of overlap at events and things like that. So yeah, that's me up in Seattle now.
All right, so let's get going here. That's not the right tab. There's always a million things in my way where I want to click. There we go. Okay, everyone can see our PowerPoint slide there, cracking the code to situational judgment tests. All right. So the kind of format for today, just to run you guys through it, we've got this session from 3 p.m. Eastern to 4:30. It's going to be a little bit of presenting and a whole lot of workshopping. So just going to run you through some of the basics. So the tests we're referring to today, we often call them SJTs. So that stands for Situational Judgment Test. There are currently 2 sort of dominant exams. There's the Casper and the Preview, and we'll go into each one of those in a little more detail here in a second. But the big thing to understand about these situational judgment tests is they are trying to fill a hole in the admissions process that gets at how students think and how they make decisions. Now, there are other ways that we measure that. That kind of thing also shows up in essays. It shows up in interview exams. Every time a new test or a new part of the admissions process comes out, I always sort of think like, oh my gosh, more money for students to pay, more things for them to do. I get that that's frustrating, and I don't want to hide from that. But also, these exams are attempting to get away from the idea that getting into med school is a stats only thing. And if you've worked with med school headquarters before, if you've listened to our podcast or been on these workshops, you know that we firmly think from our years and years of helping people get into med school that your story matters. Who you are as a person matters. So these exams, whether or not they're hitting it exactly right, their goal is to try to learn about how you think. And so that means that I think one of the most important things to understand about these tests is there isn't necessarily a credited response, right? Like when you're doing MCAT prep, you've got A, B, C, D, and you have to know why the MCAT thinks C is right. Here, it's a little bit murkier. It's less about what is the right answer and more about how you got to the answer that you got to. That's our big picture introduction to situational judgment tests. Let's talk about the big test Casper. So Casper was created out of McGill University in Canada. It is brought to you by the same people who invented the MMI, the multiple mini interview. So you'll notice that there are some similarities in those themes, right? Because again, it tends to be about scenarios and ethical situations. It's an $85 exam for the first 7 schools. You do have to pay for additional schools if needed. And it's, in the grand scheme of standardized exams, relatively short. It's about an hour and a half long. And you can always go to Acuity Insights, which is the company that makes Casper, if you want to learn more. And also we did last year at MappedCon 2022, a deep dive into both the Casper and the Preview with Kelly Dorr, who's one of the co-founders of the Casper, and also Dania Dunleavy, who works for the AAMC Preview. So you also may want to check out the YouTube video of that if you want to learn more about the exams directly from the founders. Don't go now, watch after the workshop. Okay, so let's talk about the Preview. The Preview, I feel like, is often the less well-known of these 2 exams. If you guys can type in the chat, what do you know about the Preview? How does it compare to Casper? How's it the same? How's it different? Do you know anything? All right, I got a nothing. That's why I'm here. I love that. Thanks for your candor. And a whole bunch of people typing in multiple choice, Likert scale choices. So yeah, this test is still trying to get at competencies, and you can even see here from this lovely little graphic provided by the AAMC that here are some of the competencies that it's looking at. But the difference is that when you answer, you're going to give a scenario, and then you're going to give this kind of scale where you have to kind of decide, if I took this action, would it be very effective, ineffective, very ineffective? So that's a little bit funky that we're saying, hey, there's no right answer, and now you've got a Likert scale. But it's the same kind of oops. I don't know if that was me or one of you. It's the same kind of basic concept here. and costs about $100. It's a little longer than an hour. And same thing, you can always go to the AAMC if you want to learn more about the exam. So here's the kind of quick breakdown here. If you're comparing the two, I know lots of people are taking screenshots now, so I'm just pausing on this slide so you can do that.
Can you explain the 6 video-based responses for those who may not know that they have to do that component?
Yeah. So, well, wait, is that the video? Is that the snapshot component that's now been eliminated?
Potentially, or did they just watch the video and answer, or do they have to record themselves? Has that been removed?
Oh, no, yeah. So I'll let you talk about it. I thought you were referring to snapshot that's been eliminated. So I'll let you talk about that if you want, Courtney.
Okay. So you're going to have to record some answers of yourself. So as you are prepping for these, I would say go through and do some practice tests to make sure that you are prepared for those. That's about all I had to say about it, but it's a different element than the preview. So
yeah. And so just to clarify, there was another video-based component called Snapshot, which you can see we have on the slide, but crossed out. It's because Snapshot ended last year. So I wanted it here so if people asked, they would know. The Duet is an additional component outside of the Casper that lets you express your values that might help you find med schools that are good value fits. Snapshot was additional interview-based questions that were video-based, and that has since been eliminated. All right. So that's kind of the brief overview of the exam. And what we didn't talk about is scoring and what it means. So again, type in the chat, what do you guys know about scoring scales for these two tests? No one knows anything at all.
that's why they're here.
Casper is scored by multiple different people and is scored in quartiles. Yeah. Preview is scored on a 1 to 9 scale. Good job. Yeah. So what do those scores mean, right? Is there a cutoff score? Like how are med schools assessing these scores?
We actually had this question come up in Application Academy today.
Again, I just want to see what comes in the chat. I want to see how much you guys know. Yeah, so Victoria coming in strong. Preview is scored based on the answers from a committee and how you compare. So yeah, Preview actually talks to physicians and has physicians try to think back before you went to med school, before you went to residency, as a pre-med, what would you have known? What would you have done? Right? So it's sort of based on people who are future yous thinking, what are the things we would expect you to know and do and say? Where Casper is a little bit different. It is scored by committee. So instead of sort of being pre-scored, it's scored after the fact. And you're given essentially a percentile score. And the percentile score is in buckets. So what happens? What do med schools do with these scores? Now we have 2 former directors of admissions here, so let's let them chime in. What do you think is happening when students have these scores sent into med schools? How are they being used? I think that's the real question here.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Sure. So this is something that came up fairly often when I was the director of admissions with our school, wondering if we were going to consider it as a data point or not, or utilize it. The biggest push actually came from 3rd and 4th year faculty who were wanting indicators potentially ahead of matriculation for, potential professionalism issues or things like that would be harder to catch if somebody was just on campus taking exams and going through the first 2 years without a lot of interaction, which can happen sometimes. So they wanted to have a way to kind of gauge critical thinking and these professionalism issues. Now, how much weight a school will give to the results of either, or the score that you receive of either test, is really dependent on the institution, honestly, how much they're going to look at it. I can tell you how I would have looked at it or weighed it is if you were scoring in the very lowest percentile, where I either think that you picked C as the answer for all of them and you just didn't even try, or if it looks like you went through and took it, but your answers are very concerning and very off base. And then I also had indicators in your application for some things that may be troubling, right? Some really kind of abrasive or problematic word choices in your personal statement or your secondaries, or not a clear thought flow for the personal statement where you're just kind of bouncing around everywhere. Like, I may end up giving a little bit more weight because the two are going together than if this is just one data point. Everything else looks completely fine on your end with the application, with your secondaries. It's just another thing to kind of have as a reference point. So I think it really depends, but it probably weighs more when you're very polarized to one side. That's just my take. I don't know, Dina, it may be totally different, right? Each school is going to be, I think, different.
I agree with everything that you said, and not every school requires Casper and Preview. So that's something to think about as well.
Yeah. Now, one thing I've been told from other directors of admissions is that some schools are collecting the data, but not necessarily using it as a screening tool, right? I think some med schools at this point, because this is one thing that is sort of the good, bad of academia. Sometimes we can get frustrated in academia because things move very slowly, but things move very slowly in academia because it takes a long time for people to learn and absorb new patterns, right? So a lot of med schools are saying, hey, I'm interested in Casper and Preview, but what I'd like to see is, are there patterns? So if I just collect that data and put it aside, and then I keep doing my admissions the same way I've been doing, and now I can look 3 or 4 years later, 5 years later, and see, is there any correlation between the people that did the best in med school, the people that did the best in their rotations in their med 3, med 4, who had the most happiness with their ranking for residency, and those scores. And so I think that's something that students need to understand, is that the tests aren't necessarily even being used for screening at this point. They might just be used for ongoing analysis.
Data collection.
Yep. All right, so Madison asks a great question that is getting at the heart of why this workshop is 90 minutes long. She says, how can I do better on them? I've heard you can't study for them, but you can get used to the testing system. Yeah, so I think there's two separate parts here, right? There's prepping for it kind of mentally, intellectually, and then there's prepping for it from a technical standpoint. So the mental intellectual part, that's a lot of what this workshop is going to be today. If you've been at these workshop series before, you know I want this portion where we're just, we three, blah, 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 ending pretty quickly. We're going to put you in the hot seat pretty soon. We're going to have you guys do some volunteer questions and scenarios with us. You're going to get a chance to practice right now here in the next few minutes. So the way, how do you get better at them? Ask yourself a lot of tough ethics questions, right? Make yourself start thinking through those scenarios. And we're going to do that together now. We also do one-on-one interview prep. And even though interview prep is typically targeted at MMI and traditional essay interviews, I think you'll find that the more MMI prep you do, the easier the Casper comes to you. The other part of this is the technical side of it. And this is something where we weren't able to get it together for today, but I have this dream that I'm trying to collect all of the things I wish I knew data points that students give me after they take the Casper and Preview. And I think I can even see a few people already now typing in the chat some of this stuff. But so, for example, and you guys can read this in the actual handbooks of Casper and Preview. One of the things that's going to happen is when you take the test, there's going to be, because it's an online remote test, there's going to be a proctor who logs in and actually starts messing around with your settings on your computer. So do you want to do something like create a new blank profile that doesn't have all your settings super hyper customized before a proctor comes in and changes them all? I've had students say, well, I was told I could use a desktop or a laptop, and then I didn't understand that I had to have a webcam circle my entire room to show there was no proof of cheating. And I'm holding a laptop here, so me showing you my whole room, I'm not going to really do it because it's a mess, but you can see in theory is easy. But if I had a big heavy desktop with a webcam attached, that would be a really hard thing to do. Like, I think I'm sitting down for an intellectual endeavor, and so they have to start like lifting pieces of furniture. So definitely do your research on the technical side of the day just to make sure that you're ready. And again, all of that data is available in the handbooks. It just seems like a lot of students read it and don't really process how much buildup there's going to be before you can actually start the test. Any other I wish I had known before I took the test? I know there's some people in here who have taken it before. Any other good tech tips? All right, so let's get to the heart of what we want to do today here. Go back to screen share. So coming soon is you. This is you in the spotlight. That's what that picture is. So just a quick reminder before we jump into the workshop portion of this, if you would like to do one-on-one advising with us for general strategy or for prep for your Casper, your preview, your interviews, if you're still, most people are working on secondaries at this point in the season. We offer all of that. So that's at medicalschoolhq.net/advising. Dina and Courtney both still have spaces this summer, although Courtney, last I looked, your July is pretty full. But if you want to do interview prep with with Courtney in August, now's the time to book it. Dina has a little bit more room just by virtue of being a newer player, so she's got availability much sooner. So let's start digging into this. So if you are interested in participating in one of these scenarios, what I would like you to do at this point is raise your hand. We're all going to read this scenario together. We'll kind of discuss as a group, but what I would like is somebody to rate, whoever's interested in kind of doing some practice here with the group, raise your hand and we'll let you unmute and we'll let you respond to this scenario. Okay. Madison, I see your hand up. I'm going to allow you to talk. So you should now have an invitation to. Hello.
Hi.
Okay. So welcome. Thanks for being the brave soul to go first.
No worries.
So let's give the scenario a read here. And then we'll give you a moment to think and then you can respond. So in this scenario, your close friend who has been experiencing personal issues and struggling academically offers to share answers to a take-home exam with you. The friend.
Hey, Rachel, we can't see the prompt.
We can't?
Mm-mm.
Oh.
No, I always see is black.
Interesting. Oh, it says I'm screen sharing. Let me turn off screen share and try again. Thanks for chiming in.
Thanks, Courtney.
Yeah. How's it now?
I can see it.
Yep.
Okay, that's weird. Thank you. I guess I'll start again. Okay, scenario one. Your close friend who's been experiencing personal issues and struggling academically offers to share answers to a take-home exam with you. The friend explains they received the answers from another classmate and wants to share them with you because they know you've been busy with other commitments. What do you do? And Madison will give you a moment here to think. And then when you're ready, unmute and start talking.
So the first thing that I would do here is I would express that I'm not necessarily feeling comfortable with sharing answers to an exam because I want my scores and things to reflect my own academic strengths and to make sure that I'm answering based off of what I know because I want to earn my grade because that's important to me as a value is to make sure that the work that I'm putting in is reflected in my grades. And then the other thing that I would want to talk about with my friend is that, you know, I don't necessarily believe that they're doing the right thing, and I would want them to morally consider what they're deciding to do, and I would want to give them the opportunity to reflect a little bit more on maybe why that they wanted to do that, and give them the chance to maybe speak with the professor first so that they can handle this in their own manner. And then I'd want to give it a little bit of time, and then eventually I may want to consider bringing this also up to the professor if they choose not to go ahead and handle it themselves.
Okay.
That's kind of, I don't know. That's
Yeah, no, thank you.
whack.
So here's kind of how we like to do this. I want to know, how do you think you did? I want the students to type in the chat how they think they did. And then our two former directors of admissions are going to weigh in with some thoughts too. So Madison, how do you feel you did?
I think that my answer was maybe a little bit all over the place. I could have maybe worded things a little bit better and had a more clean structure as to my decision tree process from how I went through each thing. And also, I don't know, sometimes I feel like if you go with a more like altruistic answer, one, maybe people don't believe you, and two, then the other side of it is sometimes I feel like you have to choose like, oh, you need to tell the professor, but in reality, I would really just want my friend to, you know, think about it and talk with them about it first, then just go straight to like the authorities over it. Like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like the best thing to do isn't always like with the law per se, but I think that there are rules for a reason, but sometimes like there are exceptions or changes that have to be made that better fit the whole community versus just one scenario. And but I don't know, maybe that dings me. Maybe I'm supposed to just say go immediately to the professor, and I just don't know quite how it works. And I feel like maybe that is why I didn't do so well on the Casper exam, because I didn't go to authorities or whatever.
Well, I mean, Madison, I really appreciate you being brave going first. And I think the fear you just articulated is a really common one. It's like, am I supposed to, like, it goes back to that idea of, is there a secret right answer? So just thank you for being vulnerable and admitting that was your thought process, because I think a lot of students can relate to what you just said. Courtney, what do you think of this answer?
I really actually liked your answer. I thought you explaining that you wanted the grade to be reflective of your own personal knowledge, how you've studied, what you've gone over, I think is a good way to go about it, and the way that you described it. I think it's natural to consider your friendship with this person if you want to go to the professor and things like that. So I liked hearing your reasoning about what you would or wouldn't have done. You know, probably as a follow-up question, I would have said, okay, well, what if this wasn't a friend? Does that change your answer at all? You know, just kind of push you a little bit further. Like, this wasn't a close friend who was struggling. This is just a stranger, and you saw them, you know, getting answers and using them. Do you go to the professor right away? You may, because there's no emotional attachment, right? So I think, you know, in these cases, they'll kind of push you a little bit further, but it's okay to bring into context things like, this is my friend, they were struggling. Maybe I could reach out to them and see, you know, if there are other ways that they can still maintain their academics, or there's resources on campus since they are struggling, things like that. But I think you got close on those things, and it's not a bad thing to say that you would follow the rules and give them the opportunity to kind of bring it up themselves, but weighing the situation. So overall, I thought it was a pretty good answer.
Yeah. Great. So Dina, I know you said because there was some interference on Madison's side, you couldn't hear all of the response. So maybe kind of addressing sort of her bigger concern, right? So not just for this, but she said, am I supposed to immediately say I'm going to the professor, or am I supposed to say what I would actually do? Right? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I would immediately address what you are going to do, because it's your action and you're making that decision for yourself. But, you know, again, you're the one answering the question. And I apologize, there's a lot of interference. I couldn't hear you the entire time. But in listening to Courtney's feedback, I definitely, it sounds like you were really thoughtful, especially in talking about how you wanted it to be your own knowledge. I think that that's a really strong, big, strong point.
Mm-hmm. So there's a difference like in the delivery, right? I think what I was really appreciating about your answer is that you weren't coming across as super abrasive. Like, I would say that they were in the wrong and this was inappropriate and I would stand my ground and things like that. Be like, okay, that's, you know, views different than your own, not having any compassion to the situation. Like, it's a very strong stance. Now, it's following the rules, but a little bit has to do with the soft skills in your delivery, right? Saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable with it because of this reason, kind of explaining it to them. You know, I really don't think you should be doing that. I may feel like compelled to talk to the professors or any way, you know, not do this. I don't want to know about it, whatever it is. But part of the response that I liked was your delivery and kind of the cadence of how the conversation built. I think that's important too. So just so you guys know.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, if it were as simple as report to CPS, tell the professor, we wouldn't have ethics exams.
Yeah.
Right. It usually is more complicated than that. One question I always like to ask people when they're thinking about how to answer this is, what will get you the desired result? Right here, the desired result is, could we get this friend and her acquaintance to realize that cheating doesn't just harm them, it harms the whole class, right? It harms the whole curve. And reporting them isn't necessarily going to put them on your side. They're not going to be open to your point of view, right? So there is that desire of like, oh, I'm supposed to do the right thing. I'm supposed to report to the right people. But what I think you also want to think is, what's the outcome that would benefit everybody in the scenario? Right. And sometimes that's not, I'm not saying don't do the proper reporting, because sometimes that is absolutely the right answer, but I'm saying it's not always the full answer. And I think what you did really well, Madison, in particular, was giving some time, right? I'm going to try to let them correct their own mistake before I force an authority to correct them. So yeah, good job, Madison. You did better than you think you did.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to disable her talking. Looks like Sophie is up next. I'm taking volunteers from my presenters too, Dina or Courtney. I guess Dina, I'll let you do this one. Do scenario 2 for me. And Sophie, let me make sure you're unmuted and that you can talk. Sophie, you there?
Did you want me to read it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. First, let's make sure Sophie's here with us. All right.
Hello?
Hi, Sophie.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, just make sure you got you. Okay, so yeah, Dina, please read scenario 2, and then Sophie will give you a chance to respond.
A member of your group project who is known to be dealing with personal issues is not contributing equally. The project due date is looming. The rest of the team members are reluctant to approach the member due to their personal issues. How do you handle this?
I'm sure none of us have ever had an experience doing a team project where somebody wasn't pulling their weight.
So in this scenario, I would reach out to the rest of the team members and understand exactly what their reluctance is about, and then making sure that they're aware that while our team member might not be contributing equally, they might be dealing with other issues that could definitely be affecting their work, and we should definitely be understanding of them, while also giving them a chance to be able to correct that mistake by letting them know on an individual basis. So for example, I would go and approach this member myself and let them know that the team is feeling this way, and that while we are feeling this way, we want to make sure that they're all right and they're able to fulfill their task, and if not, how we could help them do that, whether that's like teaching them a faster way to do it or just pulling some of that weight off. But unfortunately, if in a scenario where after our talks nothing really changes, I would probably go to the professor and let them know about the situation and see how we could help everyone involved be able to learn through this project and get the grade they deserve. All right, did none of that cut out, or did some of that cut out?
No, we heard you.
Okay.
All right. So Dina, you want to react to Sophie's response?
Yes, I thought you did a really great job, Sophie. I probably would have approached it the same way. I think the key for me in the scenario is why are they reluctant to approach the member? So I think, talking to all of them first, and then, speaking to the member is important. And then the last resort, probably speaking to the professor. The only thing I might have added in would have been, in speaking with the member of the group who isn't contributing, maybe offering suggestions in terms of, a reduced workload, and seeing if they could at least contribute a little bit, and maybe breaking up the project in a different way into different pieces. But I thought that you did a great job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Courtney, anything else to add?
No, I agree. I think, obviously you want to be compassionate about what somebody's going through. You want open communication, being willing to kind of step in and help, or see, what could be done to help them pull their weight, I think is.
Yeah, so I read this a little differently, and I don't know if it was just like pronoun confusion or like me projecting my own stuff. But so the sentence, the rest of the team members are reluctant to approach the member due to their personal issues. I guess that's like the member who's not contributing personal issues. But in my brain, I was like, wait, do they have personal issues with this person? Do they all have trouble confronting? Because sometimes you just get people who are like, yeah, it makes me crazy too, but I don't want to pick a fight. I'm like, so sometimes we have to pick fights, friends. That's what compassionate confrontation's about. So I was sort of interested in the are they just waiting for a leader to step up and say someone needs to have the tough talk with this person? Or were they trying to say, you're not being sympathetic, they genuinely cannot contribute right now? Which I don't think necessarily changes, right? Either way, like this person shouldn't get the A if they're not doing any work, right? But it was sort of interesting to me that there could be reluctance or hesitation on both sides.
And a lot of the times prompts are kind of left a little bit vague like that, open to interpretation for you to kind of choose how you interpret it and answer it that way. So I think this is actually a helpful example of how people can interpret it multiple ways.
So thoughts on making this one more challenging, right? I mean, Sophie did great. Maybe we can let someone else do a second step on it. But what if we confront the person and they say, I just don't have the bandwidth. You guys just need to let me rise. Someone else want to raise their hand and deal with the deeper dive on that scenario? Oh, we have a shy group. None of you want to raise your hands. Who's feeling brave? Sophie's feeling brave again. Go ahead, friend.
All right. So if said team member, I guess it's like, what was the deep dive? If everyone was very hesitant to speak to each other, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's like a deeper team communication issue. And I believe when it comes to that, we'll have to do like a group session to figure out how we can separate the personal from the professional. Because as much as it is all about, oh, this person might not like this person, at the end of the day, we should try to help each other as much as we can to finish out the project well. And so a lot of that would have to be more of a group scenario and all of us trying to understand each other's perspectives and also trying to be understanding the team member who might want to ride the wave and try to convince them to see, oh, while riding the wave might be good for now, it might not be good for your learning long term, which is more important than the letter grade per se.
Mhm.
And of course, if nothing changes, the professor is always still there for me to talk to and get better advice on how to fix the scenario to help everyone involved.
Great. Yeah, thanks for going again. All right. All right, and someone in the chat said also maybe asking the professor for an extension to help the member complete their part, but on a different timeline. Another good idea, right? There's not one right answer. That's another good answer. All right, friends, I don't know if you're sleepy today or if you're shy, or maybe there's some technical issue and you all have your hands raised and I just don't see it for some reason. But I do want to remind you that these workshops are here for your benefit. This kind of work, if you wanted to do it one-on-one with Courtney or Dina, would cost you a couple $100s per hour. So this is a free workshop for your benefit. And I say this with no rancor, no judgment, but if you guys aren't feeling doing volunteering, we can just end the session early. So if you are interested in doing some scenarios, I love that Megan and Sophie are brave, but let's see some hands up.
And just keep in mind, you may not do very well on your response, and that's okay. That's why we do these types of workshops and we do mock. So better to do it now and have some feedback from people who have actually done evaluations than still be nervous about it by the time you make it to it. Have some things just in your mind of, okay, this is how I'm going to tackle this type of question, never having verbalized it. It's really a problem. So as much as it can be cringy to do, practicing is the thing that will help the most. Verbally practicing, mock interviews, situational judgment scenarios, these types of things is the most effective. So you got to start somewhere. Even if you're not feeling like it's the strongest, attempt an answer like you would if it was an interview day and you got thrown this type of scenario, and let's see where you're at and where to build from there, right?
Yeah.
It is what it is, right? No judgment coming from us. It's better to help you. This is why we're here. We want to help you on this front end so that you're not kicking yourself, walking out of a room, saying like, oh, I wish I would have thought of this differently or practiced this or things like that. So
all right. Well, it seems like you have inspired some people. They're feeling a little braver. So thank you, Courtney. And thank you, brave souls who have raised hands.
yeah.
I'm glad you want to keep going. I would have been sad if we had to end early for lack of volunteers. All right. Courtney, you want to do scenario 3?
Sure. Okay. Who am I asking?
Oh, I don't know. Let's see whose hands up. Looks like Karina was first. Karina, I'll allow you to talk.
Thank you for your encouragement, everyone. I needed it.
Good. It's why we do this. Practice wherever you're at, we can build from. So, okay. So your question is a member of your group project who wait, is this the same one?
Oh,
Same one.
sure is. That was
The
weird.
same one.
Hey, sometimes tests have technical issues.
Yes. Okay. Scenario 4. This one's yours. You overhear a colleague discussing a private health issue at work. You have some experience with this issue and valuable advice that may help them. Do you intervene? If so, how do you go about it? If not, why?
Good question.
Mhm.
I think in deciding whether to approach this colleague or not, I would want to sort of weigh the potential upside, sort of how might it benefit them. And if I decided, I would consider my rapport with this person and the potential good it could do for them. And if I decided that both of those weighed sort of positively, I think I would sort of gently open the door to a conversation with them while not forcing them into a conversation. So I might say something along the lines of, you know, in a private, sort of private context, just sort of confess, like, I just wanted you to know I sort of accidentally overheard that conversation you were having. I want to let you know that I have some experience with that. And if you ever wanted to talk about it, I would love to share some of my experience, and then sort of leave it up to them to decide whether to, you know, act on that or not, and leave the door open for them.
Okay, so how do you feel like you did with that scenario?
I have no idea. I'm so brand new to this whole thing. But I think I accurately reflected what I would do in a situation like this, because I could imagine, not this exact thing, but I can imagine situations where I've overheard something that was maybe private and had to weigh what I would do and whether I would sort of confess that I knew this thing. And so I think it reflected me. I have no idea how I did though by the test.
I hope that it did accurately reflect you, because that's what we're looking for. We want people to answer honestly in these things. I actually think you did really well. So, you know, everybody who's gone is doing well on these. What I personally liked most, and there is some subjectivity to these responses, right? But I liked that you wouldn't intervene and jump into the conversation at that moment, especially if it was private. They were disclosing it to somebody else. And bringing yourself into that conversation at that time may have not been the most appropriate thing to do. So I liked that you let me know you would do it at a different time in private. You would offer it. You wouldn't dump the advice on that person. You would offer and say, hey, I have some knowledge about this if you want it, and disclose that, you know, you accidentally overheard it, just so that they were aware and knew, but not that you were forcing it on them or forcing yourself into the conversation. That shows me that you have some social awareness of delicate information and where and when to kind of insert yourself. And that you were weighing whether or not you thought it was appropriate for you to even bring up to this person that you had overheard it and try to share advice. So overall, I thought it was a sound answer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Courtney. I think I particularly liked how you talked about what is your rapport with the colleague, because that was the first thing I thought of, is what kind of a relationship do you have with the colleague? Is it a random colleague that you don't know? Is it somebody you're very comfortable with that, you know, you go out for drinks with after work 3 times a week? What is that relationship like? So I'm really glad that you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm. So that's why, even if it feels like you're talking for a long time, a lot of people get hung up on that, like, oh, I don't want to ramble, or I don't want to go off on these tangents. But unless you show us or tell us how you think about things and how you work the problems, then we don't have that insight, right? And Dina and I both liked how you went about this issue. And so you have to walk us through your thought process verbally on how you're moving through these types of scenarios. So I think that you did a really good job of explaining what you would do and the why behind it, or the reasoning for it, which is what we need to understand why you're doing something. So,
oops, sorry, didn't mean to jump ahead. Yeah, I agree. And then again, I want to drive home. I do think Karina did great. More than one right answer. It is possible that one of the right answers is no, I don't intervene.
mm-hmm.
So just a challenge for the audience. was anyone thinking, no, I don't think I would say something? Because you could also be right. And again, it's not about right, wrong. It's about what were you thinking? So was there someone out there who's thinking, no, I think I'd let that one slip, just go quiet? And if so, would you feel comfortable unmuting and telling us why? Right? Just so we can hear potentially a different perspective that could also be considered a correct response. Does anyone know? I guess now if you raise your hands, I won't know whether or not, because I won't know if you were in line for the other thing or not.
I mean, I think one reason I would choose no is if I knew that person to be a very private person. I think that would be a potential reason. Although I think there's this other counterbalancing fact that I think a lot of things people don't talk about and wished more people would talk about, and just knowing someone else goes through the same thing could be a gift.
Yeah. Siddhartha, I think you said you thought that way. You thought you wouldn't intervene. Is that what you're saying in the chat? I can allow you to talk if you want to expand on that.
Hello, could you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Yes, I actually did. I definitely agree with how like my relationship with the colleague would be. I didn't want to feel like I'm overstepping boundaries and telling them, hey, this is what you could potentially do, even though I do plan on saying it in kind terms. It's just, that's their own matter that they deal with. It's probably a very private matter as well, since it is a private health issue. So I wouldn't want to go out of my way to be like, hey, this is what you should do. Rather, if they feel it's the best way for them to deal with. And also depending on their personality, if they're a little bit more on the private side, you have to respect that privacy as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing I was thinking about when I was reading this one is it says, I have some experience with this issue. Okay, well, it's a colleague at work. I'm a physician. The colleague may or may not also be a physician. Does my experience trump the specialty of the doctor they're going to go see? Right? Like, I feel like there's a lot of missing data that, again, it's open for interpretation. So it's not like you don't want to add random facts to it just to make it work the way you want. But I think a lot of us, a lot of people who are bright are used to being able to help others. Right. And one of the things we sometimes have to learn as bright people is just because we know doesn't mean we have to say, right? Like if someone, for example, I was just sharing, because I'll use myself as an example because it's safe to share my own details. A lot of people are having trouble breathing right now because air pollution is bad. So sometimes, people will be like, oh, I have issues with lung issues. Like, Rachel, do you want me to give you some tips? Well, no, I had lung reconstruction when I was 10. So I'm pretty sure the sheer amount of stuff I know about taking care of my own lungs is going to trump anything that any random person on the street is trying to tell me. Right. So even if they mean well, it just may not be that helpful. Right. So I think you kind of have to think about the context of how valuable is my information. Right. And that takes some humility. So again, it's not a right or wrong, just maybe what you have to offer isn't actually that it's valuable, but could they get it from someone who knows even more?
Either way works, depending on how you go about it.
Exactly. All right. Thank you both, Karina and Siddhartha. Good job. I'll disable you guys. All right. Lena, you want to do scenario 5? It looks like, I might need help saying your name, friend. Nuzhat?
Yes,
Can you say your first name for us, please?
it's Nuzhat.
Okay, good. Okay, well, welcome.
Okay, scenario 5. Your roommate, who is a good friend and generally respectful, consistently plays loud music late at night while you're trying to study or sleep. You're aware that they use music to de-stress, but it's impacting your sleep and studies. How do you address the situation?
Well, it's my first attempt at these. I would probably approach my roommate first, and maybe at a time when it's not very stressful for them, or like not and I would just, I guess, bring it up in conversation maybe before then. And then if it's like really bothering me, like, and then I would like directly ask them if it was possible they could play their music either with their own headphones or some other way, just and try to explain that I really need like my sleep, or I need like a little bit more like quiet, or like could they like put the music down a little. Um and then I would want to like maintain that relationship because they're a friend, and I wouldn't want to like be too harsh on them. I guess I would think about like approaching it softly. And um I think I would ask them, and if they continue to play the music, I guess I would um maybe try to like work around it, at least for the studying part, and try to like bring in things into my own life to block out that music, and try to take responsibility for my own like actions, I guess.
I thought that was a great answer. I particularly liked how you said you would softly approach them. I think that word softly is important here, considering that they, it states that it's a good friend and generally is respectful all the time. And, this is maybe one thing, right, that they're doing that is inconveniencing you. So I know you mentioned in the beginning, this was your first time. I thought for your first time, you did a great job and you were really thoughtful about your answer. I would have been concerned if you had said, I would go right to my RA and, ask for them to intervene, because then that would, I would assume, would impact a relationship with somebody you have to live with every single day. And the only other thing I think I would maybe work in there would be if they weren't as receptive when you softly approach them, maybe coming up with a plan where on these set nights, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the roommate gets to play the music loud, and maybe you put headphones on and you alternate, or you work collaboratively to come up with a solution. But I thought for your first time answering a question like this, you did a nice job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And this is not in any way a paid sponsorship, friends, but Loops headphones. They'll change your life. They're not cheap. They're a great investment. Just saying. All right. Let's move on. Loops. I'll put it here. I'll type it in the thing. If you just Google Loops headphones, you'll find them. They're amazing. They are not cheap, but it's a good investment if you have a lot of sounds in your life you need to block out. Although maybe now I'll get a paid partnership with them. Just kidding. All right, next scenario. I haven't done one in a while. I'll go. Okay, so let me lower Nuzatan. Let's see. Kate, I'm going to go to you. You're third in line, but you haven't gone yet, and the other hands up have gone before. So let me allow you to talk.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. Okay, so scenario 6, your friends who you don't get to see very often because of your different schedules are pressuring you to attend the party the night before an early important class. They argue that socializing and de-stressing is also important in college. What do you do?
Oh, this is such a similar scenario to my life, so let's try to think how I actually would approach that. I would definitely thank them for the invitation and say that I'm very thoughtful. It's very thoughtful of them to think about me and how they are approaching, and stressing that de-stressing is very important. However, I would also set a gentle boundary that I do have a very important class next day. However, I would love to see them, and I would love to take the toll of scheduling the next meeting with us, since it's me canceling it, it's on me. So I would really love to help schedule the next night out or whatever fits their schedule better, since it's on me this time. And again, I would reiterate that maybe we can meet this day but earlier. That would fit my schedule better, but still I do really appreciate their thought of me, but I do have my boundary for that.
Yep. Great. How do you think you did?
I think I did okay. Maybe there are definitely room for improvement for how else I could approach it apart from just suggesting a reschedule or something else. But I think I did set up a good soft boundary for myself and specify that for me classes are at this time more important than distressing. However, I do feel like I could do better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I thought you did well. My brain started going to logistics. And again, it's not like we don't need to change logistics to make the answer easier. But I thought, like, is this typical college party on the East Coast that doesn't even start until after midnight? Or is this a lot of schools in the Midwest, like people start partying at 8 p.m.? Like, could you go for an hour and then leave? And it just like that's going to vary based on the local culture of your campus. I also started thinking about how you talked about creating a soft boundary. I think it's so important to understand, and I really liked the word choice you used there. Boundaries are about what you do and do not accept and what you do. It's not about your friends. So I'm glad that you didn't say the boundary is they should stop pressuring me to parties on a school night, because you can't control what they do or do not do. You can only control your response. So I thought that shows a lot of wisdom, that you understood that the boundary is, I've decided to prioritize this class, right? You can ask me or not ask me, but my answer is what it is, right? Is there any world where you would say yes? I'm just curious.
Definitely. Yeah, if it was an important class, but for example, I would be prepared for it, then yeah, definitely. Or something that I know that, okay, I already had 8 hours of sleep last night, I can run off 4. That does happen in college a lot. So maybe if it was something more flexible in my point of view, I would definitely say yes, or just attend for half time. But in my understanding of this scenario, that's my problem. I already took Casper last year and didn't do great. I think because I take some scenarios way too straightforward, and I'm not exploring how I can expand the scenario and be more vague in it. I always try, like, these boundaries I set in, I have to work within them and I cannot bend them. So that's usually, I think, my problem with Casper and preview.
Yeah, Kate, I can relate to that so much. So, I've been in admissions and MCAT prep for a long time. And when I first started, a lot of what I was doing was like customer service, like talking to students or parents who were frustrated with their MCAT prep or SAT prep or whatever. And I would want to go into those phone calls with an entire piece of paper of all the things I was going to say. And my manager would always be like, okay, you wrote all those down. Now I'm going to take the paper away from you, because I don't want you to recite your list of talking points. I want you to go in there and listen. And she would be like, Rachel, what if you just have a conversation with them? And I'm like, what? But I need to be ready. Like, you don't know yet, right? And that's one of the challenges with these scenarios is we only give you the starting point. So now you sort of have to imagine, well, how might that conversation go? And you have to be open to the fact that it could go a lot of ways, and maybe some ways that you don't actually predict, right? And I think that's why these tests are hard, because people are trying to get to the right answer, but you don't have all the information yet.
Yeah.
So yeah. Good job. Thanks for complaining.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Let me take Kate's hand down. If I lower your hand and you wanted to go again, feel free to raise it. I'm just lowering people to make sure that I know after they went once it was lowered. Looks like Madison's hand is up. I'm happy to let Madison go a second time, but do want to, maybe I'll let Courtney or Dina talk since they seem to have a softer touch. Do want to remind you all, we still have about 20 minutes. So got time to do a few more scenarios if you guys are interested.
Who wants to do the long one? And again, for the most part, you guys are coming up with very thoughtful answers, and practicing is good because the next step will be polish, right? Not just telling me, but telling me in a very polished and professional way where there's a clear thought flow and you feel some confidence in what you're saying. So again, practice, practice. But I think Madison's the one that wants to take the long one.
All right, let's let her. Thanks for being brave, friend. Can we just do a test of your audio, Madison?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we still have some crackle. I'm gonna mute in case it's me and you echoing off of each other.
Is it better now? Okay, awesome.
Courtney, did you want to read or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I can read. Okay. You have secured an internship with a highly regarded local nonprofit organization that works on social issues you deeply care about. It's a 2-week commitment that could potentially lead to further opportunities. Upon receiving your course schedule, you realize that the internship hours overlap with a weekly mandatory seminar. This seminar is only offered once this semester, and attendance contributes significantly to your final grade. What do you do?
Okay, so for me in this situation, being that it greatly impacts my grades with having my attendance be mandatory, but also wanting to participate in this internship, I would want to take the time and meet with both of the different groups, the internship and with my professor, and express what's going on between the time conflicts. And I would want to see if there was a way for whether my mandatory participation with the attendance, if I could attend something else or do additional work to make up for that attendance, or if it was something that was a non-negotiable item, and then I would have to make the decision as to what was more important to myself at the time, or to see if potentially the internship, if I could participate in it later, or if there was a different time that I could come in. And then on the flip side of things, with talking to my professor, I want to go to the nonprofit organization and see how much of that time overlap there would be between the two, to see if it was still realistic for me to work out a schedule that was still flexible enough for me to be able to participate in the internship, but also it not impact my grades, because my grades are very important to me. And I think that doing well in school is something that I really value. And so seeing that it would be a conflict for the two, I'd really want to make sure I communicated with both opportunities, and to really express where I was at with each of them, to make sure that if they did cause me to not, do as well in one area, that I would be able to commit to one or the other, so that at the end of the day, if there isn't a compromise that can be made, that I can either give up that internship spot to somebody who can fully participate and me reapply in the future, or if there is something, then I would like to be able to participate in both and put in the extra effort.
Do you think it would be fair for the professor to allow the seminar to not be mandatory for you, but hold everybody else accountable?
I think that in a way, no, but if there was something where I put in extra effort and time that was more energy requiring, that maybe that would be a way for me to make up that that time overlap. But if that is something that's really non-negotiable and it's strictly mandatory and there are no other exceptions to be made, then I have to live with that.
Okay. So how do you feel about that one?
A little shaky.
because of my reaction and what I pushed you on, or because of what you said?
I feel like this is one of the ones where it's like a rock and a hard place, and you don't know exactly what the best way is to go about it because of the situation. Because I don't think that there's like one, I don't know, good way to go about making the decision, which is like how the exam is. So thanks for the practice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was helpful to know kind of how you worked through things. The reason that I pushed you on it is because, you know, sometimes they ask follow-up questions, right? And either in an interview or a situational judgment, you can't let your perceived, I guess, particularly in an interview, like if I was like, okay, well then what about this? What about this? And I'm looking at you like that, you may think, oh my gosh, I'm bombing this. So you can't really take that into play, or if they're digging deeper, not taking into account new and extenuating information. So overall, I think you did well on that. You're very good about kind of helping walk through your thought process while you're making choices, which is important. That's the whole point of these types of questions. I like that you were willing to be very upfront and direct about communicating to see if something could be worked out with both parties instead of just one. And then obviously making a determination on what you needed to do. I mean, with this being a 2-week commitment, posing that against a semester long of mandatory classes seems like, you know, potentially there could have been opportunity there if you were only going to miss 2 or parts of 2 or something like that. But, you know, I just asked what you do and not necessarily what the result of it is or which one you would pick or anything like that. So I was just wondering how you navigate through that. So I think you did a good job of kind of working through.
Thank you. I actually, in full transparency, I forgot that it only said 2 weeks in comparison with a long semester. So that's also good to remember.
I think a lot of people would, because this is a longer prompt. So if you get, you know, 2 minutes to read a prompt and then you have to go and answer it and recall all of the context that they've given you, it can be really difficult. If you're trying to think out how you're going to respond to something, some of those details start going. So it's good practice. Sometimes they will purposefully make them long or kind of bury the question or the topic on purpose. So good job.
All right. We have 15 minutes left. I think potentially we could stop here and just do open Q&A if you guys want. So type in the chat or raise your hand. Well, yeah, let's do this. So what do you guys want? Do you want to do open Q&A or do you want to do one more scenario? Type in the chat. What's your preference? Got 1 vote for scenario. Okay, more scenarios. Good. Okay, so starting to like them. So now that means one of you who just said you vote for more scenarios should also maybe consider raising your hand. Or someone else.
We're not that scary. You're not on camera.
I feel like we've been, I mean, the meanest I was is when I threatened to end the session. We've been so nice to every response.
Yeah. We could be mean. We could be withholding.
I've seen Courtney be very mean.
Yeah, well, mean is one term.
You're right.
Very forward and blunt about things, sure.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen both you and Scott, Dr. Wright, give nothing back in an interview, which sometimes makes people think they're not doing well. And really, you're just showing them that, look, some interviewers have amazing poker face. It doesn't mean you're not killing it.
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Please help me say your first name. Prabjot? Prabjot. Nice to meet you. Thanks for participating. All right, I'll read this one. It's another long one. And you guys have been chiming right in, which is great. But when we get to the bottom, it's okay to take a few seconds just to process before you start talking. Okay, so you were volunteering at a local retirement home. where you visit a number of residents each day. One of the residents, a former professional musician, doesn't have regular visitors and thoroughly enjoys your company, often engaging you with fascinating stories of their past concerts and tours. You enjoy these conversations, but you find that they're making it difficult for you to spend adequate time with the other residents you're assigned to visit. What do you do?
I think what I would do is I would start by visiting the other residents first, seeing as maybe they're not as talkative as this former professional musician, and then that would possibly leave more time at the end to be able to talk to this one resident that likes to converse more. I would also maybe gently bring up, I love talking to you, but I also do have to, I also would like to spend some time with everyone else. Maybe even consider like group activities or group conversations or games that we could do. Because I also think it's important to acknowledge that this individual is possibly feeling lonely as they're not getting as many regular visitors and needs maybe a little bit extra attention. I don't really know what else.
Okay, great. How do you think you did?
I think I did okay, but maybe be more organized.
Yeah, well, you didn't in a real SJT or an MMI, you're going to have a couple minutes to read it and think before you have to start typing or talking, right? So it is harder to be organized when you're doing these on the fly, and like dead air looms heavy on Zoom, right? So people, even when I say you can take some time to think, people usually feel like, oh, I better get going. And I think Courtney said it really well before. First, you just get comfortable thinking and answering. And then once you're used to sort of, okay, here are my thoughts, that's where you can go from just get comfortable to polishing, right? So, I mean, I think for an early attempt at this, that was great. You're right. When you practice more, you will polish more, but it wasn't like I couldn't follow your line of process. Like I still understood what you were thinking. And your first response happened to be the same as mine. My first thought was, well, what if I just save him for last? But I really loved when you thought about group work. Because yeah, I bet he's lonely, but also occurred to me like maybe some of those other residents would also like to hear those stories. Like this person's a born performer, right? Like maybe people want him to perform for them. And I don't even, maybe even getting out the music, but I just mean like, there could be, if there are other people who are lonely, like this could be a putting two problems together and solving them. So I enjoyed that kind of, that creative solution that I hadn't thought of, but when you raised it, I thought, oh, that's such an interesting angle, right? To like take it beyond just your volunteering, but how are you helping them when you're not there? So yeah, I thought it was a very thoughtful response. And again, it's not about right or wrong. It's about knowing what's going on in your brain, right? And you were considering it from multiple angles, and you showed me what you were thinking.
Thank you.
Nina or Courtney, anything else to add on that one?
You know, I thought the same exact thing as you, Rachel. Like the way that you started it about, you know, seeing everybody else first. That was my immediate thought, and then I also thought about the group, but I took it another level. I think in my head, I thought, you know, can he perform, like Rachel mentioned, for visitors? And then if he is like this professional musician that went on tour and concerts and was somewhat famous, like, and that's what his passion was. I don't even think it says gender, so I shouldn't say his, former professional musician. Maybe think about speaking some high school students who are musicians, who need volunteer hours, who would want to come in and maybe bring their guitar and talk about that, or listen to their stories as well, just to make a lasting impact, like Rachel mentioned.
Yeah, I liked that you acknowledged that he was probably feeling lonely, because of the lack of visitors, you still had your job to do, but, you know, saying, hey, go, you know, you need to sit over there so I can go and see everybody else. It's not fair to not see everybody else. You know, maybe isn't the most compassionate or empathetic way to see it, or to talk to that person. So at least acknowledging that there's probably a driver behind the action is good insight into how you think about it and why you may say that. I mean, the thing is you do still need to see the other residents. So I agreed with your proposed action and things. I was trying to think here how I would pose this, kind of say, okay, well, you know, what if somebody said, because we say there's no right answer. So I was trying to think of a wrong answer, like, oh, I would change my shift, or I would, you know, tell them to, you know, that I need to spend equitable time with each person. Those still aren't wrong. I just need to know your reasoning for picking them. So, you know, I guess the wrong one would be, again, like the abrasive, polarizing, extreme or abrasive actions, right? Those may be wrong. But the rest of it, as long as I have your reasoning and I can see kind of where you're going and you're trying to be thoughtful, it's probably not problematic. So even if we don't agree on what the steps should be.
Yeah. I was just going to say, would it be wrong to walk in the room with a stopwatch? But I use stopwatches in my advising, and that's more about stopping me from going over than about the student. All right, good job. Thanks for going from Joe. All right, so let's wrap up there. We won't do any more scenarios from there. We'll just do questions. So you can, I'm going to lower everyone's hands just so we're kind of clearing the board. So it not for a scenario practice, but if you just have a question, you can raise your hand. You can also type in chat, but it's usually a little bit more efficient to just talk. Yeah. Anyone have any final questions? You've got 2 former directors of admissions in the house here.
I was not a director.
Sorry,
Please don't put me in the same category as
Senior
Courtney.
admissions officer and former director of admissions. Thank you for making me be more precise.
Clarify that.
Karina says, what's the right next step to get more familiar with the tests? Yeah, if you go to the Casper website in the preview test, each of them have like kind of the equivalent of like the MCAT essentials guide, right? So there's a detailed handbook. Is it a fun read? No, you should still read it cover to cover once. And then you should probably bookmark, you know, the link somewhere to refer back to for reference. There is a practice exam for the preview. So I would go through that. I think there's also a practice exam for Casper. So even though people say, oh, you can't prep, I don't completely agree with that. I think you can always do preparation for anything, for any test. I think that idea of you can't prep is if you're expecting to learn tips and tricks, right? Like for those of you who did SAT prep, whether it was the Princeton Review calling it plugging in or Kaplan calling it working backwards, you realized, oh, on the SAT, I could take a math problem and do 8 steps, or I could do it as arithmetic backwards, right? Like it's not going to be like that. There aren't shortcuts like that.
Yeah, so with preview, with its different format, right, with the Likert scaling, it has options to select from the multiple choice thing. How do you recommend approaching this? Answer honestly. That's what they're looking for, just like with the verbal response, given what you're able to choose from, put yourself in the scenario and say what you think. Because if you try to answer to the test or what you think, they're going to want to know. It'll probably end up a bit more problematic because, you know, in your mind, you're reasoning through a bunch of different factors and things like that. You're taking things into account, hopefully. And as it builds, you can probably then still keep on track with answering those types of questions. So, yeah, to be honest.
Yeah, someone in the chat had said, can you kind of give us more insight into preview? So this slide that's up is a sample of a preview question. And you can see what's going on here isn't that different than what we just did. We gave an answer and then we talked about how would those answers play out. That's kind of what this is doing, right? So they're giving you 8 possible responses to a scenario. So as opposed to you verbalizing or typing them, they're saying, here are some responses. And then you kind of think about, well, would I do that? Would I try that? Right. So it's not that different than the kind of analysis we're doing today. It's just that ultimately you are going to have to pick on a scale for these. Okay, I think I saw a hand go up. Let me turn off screen share so I can look at it. Victoria.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, in all honesty, why do they always want you to choose sort of to go to authorities whenever someone makes a mistake? Because I feel like my first approach would be to talk to that individual, especially if it's like the first time they're doing something like this. Maybe they weren't unaware. Like, I feel like I want to get to know why that individual did something wrong before going to authorities. But in preview and in Casper, I've seen this pattern like throughout, that it's always, you should go tell somebody about it immediately. Or like if authority gives you advice, that is always very effective in preview, versus if you're going to ask a classmate for advice, that's always just effective and it's not very effective.
I guess I want to challenge you a little bit, and not in an I disagree with you way, but just to be sure, like, what are you basing that on? Like your anecdotal experience? Or I mean, have you seen people from the preview say, yeah, that's how we credit those responses?
I took the preview practice test and I've already taken the preview exam, but based on the answers that were given after I took the practice exam, that was every single time. Anytime that there was an issue like that, the most effective response was always to tell authorities, but like an authority of the school, a teacher, like anybody who would be directly able to sort of correct the issue, right, like in the moment. And I feel like that builds a lot of resentment, especially if you're going in with that type of mentality and at med school. I feel like it doesn't like reflect camaraderie, especially openness or a safe environment for students. I feel like it's just, I don't know, maybe that's just a weird thing. I just don't feel like it builds a good community.
I would agree with you. And I think weighing when and where and why to go to authorities in some situations is completely appropriate, right? Now, on the situational judgment test, like for preview, I can see how it would be different between what's most appropriate versus what is effective in resolving this issue, right? It depends on what I'm asking for. So if it would very effectively fix and remedy this situation quickly, maybe that's why they're defaulting to that answer. And then it kind of de-escalates or becomes less effective from there. So I would say look at the wording on how they're presenting the options, because it may not be how you necessarily navigate the situation in different contexts. It may just be like in the last one, what's most or least effective.
Thank you.
And I have to go. I have to jump.
Casper.
Yeah, I have to go into a session. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I think we all have hard stops now. So we will call it off there. But yeah, thank you again for coming. If you're looking for more Casper and preview information, definitely go straight to the sites, go to the sources, download their handbooks, look at their practice materials. And then if you want some more opportunities to join in practice sessions, we will be doing interview prep later. Again, a lot of overlap between interview and Casper. And you can always sign up for one-on-one prep through medicalschoolhq.net. We have advising with Dina, with Courtney, with me, and with several other advisors. So feel free to reach out if you want to work with us one-on-one.
Interview prep is helpful. You've got to verbalize those answers, even if it's not with us. Use your phone, something.
Yeah.
Practice.
Yeah, right. Whether or not you pay for prep.
Practice.
All right. Take care, everyone.